So my name's Jason Barkeloo, and I really am glad you're all here, obviously, early in the morning. So what I'm going to do is lead this panel about how DAOs and open science, open access could potentially be impacted by DAOs, blockchain, Web3. So what we'll do here is give everybody a chance to introduce themselves in a couple of minutes.
Hi, my name is Shady. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist and founder of OpSci and working on building tooling for the DeSci movement. Oh, you have a mic, so I'm also a part-time Viking.
I'm Sarah. I'm a group leader at Imperial College London, and I'm trying to move much more of my research into decentralized science, open science. So that's why I'm here, and also starting a new venture in data diversity and drug discovery, which I've asked some of you here about. So yeah, excited to be here. It's my first DeSci event. So good to meet you all.
Yeah, hi, my name is Martin Codyre. I'm a neuroscientist and an engineer. I have a background before I kind of transitioned to the biomedical world in the algorithmic trading space. And I suffered a spinal cord injury about 12 years ago. And I then started looking at science, which I believed could solve all the problems, like going to the moon, etc. This was all something that could be done easily, or relatively easily. And I found a very, very broken system from the scientific side of things, even as simple as a PDF, right? Like it's back to paper days. And I was let down by that scientific system, in that there were no valid therapies for things like spinal cord injury, and I looked at a lot of other diseases as well, and I saw a lot of very promising science that was left on shelves all over the world. And so I also have a background in the crypto world. I've been involved in that for quite a few years, and I see opportunities to leverage decentralized ledger systems and new ways of organizing humans to kind of combine the two areas. And with Fleming protocol, we're working on a data economy for patient-driven biomedical innovation, so that the patients are participants and part owners in discovery, and that, importantly, that can then composably interface with all of the work that we're all building here today and interact with things further down the stack, which is the actual molecular discovery or the molecule itself that might be somehow secured via some ledger system, and that we can build this whole composable system. And that's why I'm here, and it's great to meet you all.
Thanks, Martin. So my name's Jason Barkeloo again, and after a military career in the US, which I ended running a medical research lab, pretty large medical research lab, I then took over teaching actually in high schools and colleges. The sciences, did that for 4 or 5 years, and I invented a technology to help people with special needs. And that led me into my very first entrepreneurial endeavor. And this is my 5th startup. I've had a couple of exits. And so sustainability is a really big, important thing for me. And I don't hear much of that in this space. You know, we talk about DAOs, we talk about blockchain, we talk about Web3, but those sound like science projects to me, engineering projects, and I don't frequently hear much about sustainability. So what I'd like to do is ask our panel about what ideas they might have about how we make science, particularly Web3, blockchain, and DeSci, sustainable.
Yeah, I guess I'll get the conversation going. So when we think of sustainability, I think there's multiple avenues of approach or attack. There's financial sustainability, right, which is the first thing that comes to mind. There's social sustainability, right? How do we commit to building protocols and services that can be maintained and that will survive even after maybe the original maintainers have gone on? I believe there's administrative or governance sustainability, right? So can we build protocols that have a core group of contributors that custodian and can transition in and out? So maybe I'll touch, and there's probably other versions of that as well, depending on how wide you want to bridge the definition. But maybe I'll touch on a few of those, and maybe everyone else has some ideas on that, or maybe other definitions too. When we think of financial sustainability, you know, it's important to really, for me personally, what struck me as an aha moment where it was like, hey, you know, I could go do a postdoc, keep my head down and do what I love, which is developing pulse sequences and analyses and studying the human brain. The aha moment came when I realized, hey, there are open source finance tools widely available right now that I could spend just about the same amount of time that I do interacting with a program officer or preparing a grant or competing for funding as perhaps deploying an automated market maker and launching a financial protocol that can serve the needs of a lab, for example. So this aha moment, of course, was very far detached from the actual execution of something like that as I've gotten to think about it a little bit more. But I do believe that tokenization is a really significant, important watershed moment in both the internet and in human society and how we organize in general. I believe that tokens allow us to track the value of things that were once valueless, right? For example, data, right? So now that we can actually tokenize and control access to data, we can represent them as these, abstract digital objects that have some indication of ownership or some indication of where they came from and who's provided access control to them. And you can put them into a Uniswap pool or a balancer pool with other tokens that might be collateralized by other tokens, right? And so it's a neutral technology with both, I think, very significant implications in terms of good things and bad things. But one of the things it does is it allows natural price discovery for assets of data. And so you can extend that metaphor, I think, to all of the digital objects of science that might be coming out today as we're in this transitory period where science is transitioning more into becoming a software, to quote Eric yesterday from our panel, and becoming more digital. And I think maybe that's it for, yeah. Do you have any thoughts, Sarah?
Yeah, I guess I can add more from my perspective, which is I'm a scientist. So yeah, how we kind of onboard people and getting them involved in this area, in this space. So talking about sustainability, we need people to be in it for the long term, right? Not just for, maybe they do a small project here, a small project there, and that's a great starting point. But ideally, yeah, if we can find a way to make this sustainable for researchers, for people, I think that would be great.
Yeah, I suppose when I think about sustainability from the context of the end users of products out there in the world, and particularly from a patient perspective within the biomedical domain, a lot of the development of products within the pharma industry is about creating a product that delivers a certain improvement in some outcome measure, and then securing a IP moat, as they like to say, around that, so that nobody else can reproduce that. But then the producers of this are quite happy to just leave it at that level and not improve it, even if they can, because there's a newer way of doing things, but that might not be as secure from an intellectual property perspective as the original discovery. And there's no incentive for these big sales and marketing companies like the Pfizers, et cetera, to progress that biology and improve patient outcomes further. Whereas if the patients themselves or the end users of any product, biomedical is one, but you could see it in photovoltaics or battery chemistry or any end user product that I think in most domains the end users aren't really participants in, but the simplest way and the most people with the most skin in the game is the patient communities. And if the patients own or are participants in the development of improvements in their own outcomes, I think there's a lot more sustainability in creating a loop there where the goal is to actually continuously improve the molecule or the deliverability of the molecule or its efficacy or longevity within a tissue, for instance, rather than creating just a flat level. The patients themselves in those groups will continually strive to improve it and sustainably create better outcomes for patients and therefore societies.
Well, thanks, guys, for that. So for me, it's pretty simple. If you can't fund your entity, you're not going to make it. And right now, I think most people in this space are really reliant on grants and that kind of funding. But at some point, you've got to have a value proposition that makes it fundable. And that always means you have to be able to generate money. You have to be able to generate revenues. I know that's anti-altruistic for this group, but at the end of the day, you got to figure out how the world benefits from it, and that means there has to be revenues behind it. And so for another question that I have for you guys, how would, and this ties to funding, of course, because funders like to see intellectual properties, formal intellectual properties behind it, patents, copyrights, that sort of thing. How do you see intellectual properties being impacted by the DeSci movement?
Yeah, it's a very deep question, and I am in no regards an expert, but I'm happy to share my perceptions on this. So I believe that IP sucks. The mechanisms that we have for IP are pretty outdated and useless and unenforceable. If we take a look at the University of California school system, their combined total revenue of royalty in terms of how much they've made from all of their life-saving, society-changing, incredible advancements that have contributed to our thriving as a collective, they're not making anywhere near as much as Elsevier is on charging people and other scientists and other industry practitioners that are performing applied research and development to access their work. So there's, I think, like an evolutionary sort of selection of mechanisms that actually work and don't work. I think the numbers are something like the UC system makes something like $60 or $70 million turnover in terms of money invested in forms of grants. If you subtract that out and you take the remainder, whereas Elsevier is pushing like $600 or $700 million in turnover. So that's after subtracting all the costs for publishing, which are pretty minimal since people are working for free. So I believe in terms of how Web3 can improve upon this, kind of touching back to like why blockchain, why does everything need to be a blockchain, right? Like you get that question a lot. I think it's really important to identify the main value proposition of autonomous protocols in Web3 that run mostly on blockchains and consensus protocols, which is that these systems are always on, and once you deploy something on them, you can't turn them off. And what this means is that every interaction is logged, which has both pros and cons to it, but allows enforceability that wasn't possible before, specifically in how smart contracts are enforced. And Molecule is doing some exceptional work, and I'm really excited to take a look at their IP NFTs and their underlying smart contracts when they become open source, so that we can further explore that and see how we can build and iterate on it. You have one.
IP sucks. Yeah, that's my follow-up. No, I think it's, so I can take an example from my group now where I'm working on the structure of, it's a drug target, and I have to decide what to do with this, right? Should I just release it into the wild where more people would be able to potentially find a cure for this? Or more traditionally, send it to a journal, pay to publish it there. And, that would take months as well. So what I'm going to do is find some way to work with some of you guys to release it that way and see if we can do something like that. But yeah, in terms of most people and how we're going to get them to do it this way, it's just, I think you said both things. So IP is messed up, and the whole way we do science is wrongly incentivized. And now we finally have the tools that we can really begin to change this. Yeah. Oh, okay. I won't repeat all of that now.
Yeah, so I got very frustrated when trying to translate or work on translating promising work in a lab into a product for patients when most of my time and energy was spent trying to create an intellectual property proposition that the traditional investment community would be, okay, that's a good proposition, independently of whether the IP actually really made sense. It was very frustrating to have so much energy spent in that side of the translational pipeline, rather than proving whether the actual original concept was actually going to work in the patient community or the real world that we were trying to deliver the product in. So I think that there can definitely be a lot of improvements whereby the data itself that proves whether something is working or not becomes it's still a IP in some ways, becomes the product that people focus on and where the value is attributed. I mean, the traditional IP system dates back right to 1800s, I think it is, and it gives you the right to exclude other people from from operating in that area or producing the product. But what if there was no concept of IP ownership in that way? How would society have progressed? It's a question that I sometimes ask myself and ask others to just think about. So that's, I suppose, a small bit of input on the IP.
Yeah, so I think IPs, people say it sucks, but I think right now it's sort of a necessary evil. And again, it's tied to funding. Funders who are very risk adverse. I want you to imagine taking your checkbook out and scratching out a check for 25,000 USD. Just think about that. Do you want there to be some ROI, return on your investment, and would you like a very low risk? Or do you just want to go out with a match and burn that money? And so that's kind of where I am with IP, is that it's a necessary evil. Now, part of what I think the promise of DeSci is to be a pillar of a much broader idea, which is open science. And this is kind of antithetical to intellectual property, but I'd like to have your guys' thoughts on how you think open science could be impacted by DeSci.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a bit of a mind turner to start thinking of, oh, well, if something is free and available, then what value does it really have? I mean, I can just go and take it and use it and voila, right? And I think that in Web3, we're challenged to think of public goods in a different way. So for example, developer tooling in the space, it's out there, it's available, but how does it actually become maintained? And that's where I think sustainable incentive loops come in, right? Either through the form of perhaps protocol fees that are engineered to meet demand, so that they scale up and scale down, so that there's a clear, transparent, predetermined or pre-thought out, right? Like pre-thought out mechanism for if there's a need for this, the overhead is paid for through the need, right? Through the demand. But if it's not needed anymore, then it should scale down and not consume resources that otherwise could be used for other protocols. I think that's just one of the many examples.
Do you want to go first, Martin?
Well, I think that the open science world, when you come into it and you have to pay for all of these, you see like a $39 access fee for a document, and the real IP there, or the real value add, was kind of the copyright or the editorial, and all of the scientists around the world are doing that all for free, notionally for free, but it is attributable to their H indexes, etc., and their publication metrics. It'll improve that ultimately. I think that there's definitely better ways to do that, and I think that even the concept of a sentence or a concept within a publication, that in and of itself, if it's a novel insight, that in and of itself could be attributable and owned by the person that created that. And I think that that's a new way of looking at how we value insights and publications and the data that supports that. And I think that we can figure out and create ways to fund that through, as Shady said, kind of small transaction fees on the usage of this that flows through all of these new decentralized systems that we're trying to build. And being able to historically access that and know really what happened back 10 years ago when it was originated is very valuable, and the market will define the price of that.
Sarah, can you finish up here? We've got 1 minute left.
I saw that, yeah. No pressure.
No pressure.
What was I going to say? I don't know.
Open science and DeSci impact.
How does your lab pay for open source tooling?
Yeah, so right now, actually, I'm funded by UKRI, so I'm only speaking from the UK perspective. But everything that I do in my group has to be open, published at least. But that's not the same thing, right, as open access. So I don't have a choice when I publish something, but I still have a choice whether to release the code behind it or how accessible to make it. And for me, I think that in the end, how I'll be defined as a scientist, it's all about your reputation and who comes through your lab and what they do next and who's using your tools. So the incentives are kind of there in the background anyway. But yeah, I guess we could make it more accessible, I suppose.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate you guys being here, and hopefully we can take some questions from you offline. And thank you to the panel, and thank you so much, Timer.